Hood Eloquence presents Zodiac Alchemy, 12 Tales of Cosmic Connection. Gemini, The Masquerade of Echoes. A Hood Eloquence original, where the streets meet the literature. A note on the series. Every sign is a door. Every story is the key. Hood Eloquence. Welcome to Zodiac Alchemy, 12 Tales of Cosmic Connection, a Hood Eloquence original series where the science of the stars collides with the fire of black love, the danger of desire, and the unrelenting intelligence of the human heart. These are not horoscopes. These are not predictions. These are soul blueprints, 12 full-length literary explorations of what it means to love, deceive, hunger, and transcend when the cosmos has already written your nature into your bones. Each story in this series stands alone as a complete world. But together, they form a constellation, a zodiacal map of every kind of love that exists between people who refuse to be ordinary. Gemini is the third sign. The twin. The contradiction walking on two legs. The one who can hold two truths in both hands without dropping either. This is their story. Gemini, The Masquerade of Echoes. Where wit meets worth in a dance of duality. The most dangerous game is not one where you might lose your life. It is one where you might lose the person you pretended not to be. Anonymous. Part 1. The Invitation. Every masquerade begins the same way. Someone decides who gets to wear a face. Chapter 1. The Art of Arrival. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, which Jax always considered the most treacherous day of the week. Monday was for gamblers. Wednesday for the cautious. But Tuesday? Tuesday belonged to people who had decided something and needed you to believe the decision had always been inevitable. He turned the cream-colored envelope over in his hands 3 times before opening it, a habit he developed not from superstition, but from giving himself 3 full seconds to change his mind about things. He didn't change his mind. The card inside bore the Hartwell family crest, a falcon with both wings spread, gripping a key in each talon, embossed in gold leaf so thick it caught the light like a warning. Stephen Branch Williams cordially requested the presence of Mr. Jackson Ford at the Hartwell Annual Masquerade Gala, 3 Saturdays hence. Black tie. Masks required. The theme, printed in elegant italics at the bottom of the card, echoes. Echoes, Jax said aloud to his empty apartment, tasting the word. His apartment was not, technically speaking, his apartment. It was the 4th address he'd occupied in 14 months, each one chosen for a specific combination of exit routes and window angles. This one had the added advantage of a landlord who did not believe in asking follow-up questions, which Jax appreciated the way other men appreciated ocean views. He set the invitation on the kitchen counter next to his coffee, which was black and strong and the only honest thing about his current life, and read the secondary note that had been tucked beneath the formal card. This one was not embossed. This one was handwritten in the cramped, purposeful script of a man who had spent decades convincing people that his handwriting was distinguished rather than simply small. It read, "The letter is there. Hartwell's private collection, 3rd floor east study. The safe is behind the Horace Pippin. Get it out and we are done. SBW." Jax drank his coffee. The letter in question referred to in every communication from Stephen Branch Williams as simply the letter, as though there were only one letter in the entire world that mattered, which perhaps, for certain people, there was. Contained a coded correspondence between 2 members of the city's most decorated development board. The kind of coded correspondence that, if properly translated, would reveal that the renovation of the Southside waterfront district had been deliberately designed to fail, and that the failure had been worth approximately $47 million to 3 men who were now regarded as civic heroes. Jax did not particularly care about civic heroes or their crimes. He cared about the $75,000 that Stephen Williams had promised him upon delivery of the letter, and about the clean exit that would follow, the kind of exit that bought a man a new name and a new city, and, if he was very lucky, a reason to stay somewhere long enough to know his neighbors. He thought about this for exactly as long as it took to finish his coffee. Then he went to find a mask. The mask he chose was a half-face design in deep charcoal and onyx, the kind that covered the eyes and the bridge of the nose and left the mouth unobstructed. He selected it for reasons that were both practical and philosophical. He needed to be able to speak clearly, and he had learned long ago that people trusted a mouth more than eyes. Eyes could be trained. Mouths, under pressure, told the truth. He also selected a bespoke tuxedo in black-on-black jacquard that he had acquired in exchange for a favor done for a tailor in Charleston, who did not ask him questions either. A fact that was beginning to make Jax realize that either the world was full of people who understood the value of silence, or he had unconsciously built a life exclusively among them. He suspected it was the latter. He was not sure how he felt about this. The Hartwell estate sat at the end of a private road in the city's oldest historic district, a neighborhood of wide magnolia-lined streets and houses that cost more than the GDP of small nations and gave nothing away in their facades. The house itself was Georgian Revival, 3 stories of pale limestone with a columned portico, its interior rumored to contain 17 rooms, 4 of which had never appeared on any floor plan. Jax arrived at 9:15, which was early enough to seem engaged and late enough to ensure the rooms were populated. He handed his invitation to a man in white gloves whose face was as blank and composed as a fresh sheet of paper, stepped through the double doors, and stopped. The ballroom was extraordinary. Not in the way that money usually made things extraordinary, all flash and surface, designed to make you feel small so that the owner could feel large. The Hartwell ballroom was extraordinary in the way that certain rare things are. It made you feel like you had walked into a held breath. The ceiling was 30 feet of painted plaster, depicting a midnight sky in deep indigo and silver leaf. Chandeliers descended from it in cascading tiers of crystal that caught and refracted the candlelight until the whole room felt submerged in some gentler version of fire. The masked guests moved through this light like figures in a dream, real and unreal in the same breath, their identities obscured enough to make every face interesting. Every face was interesting. Jax's hand found the champagne glass offered by a passing server without his eyes leaving the room. He catalogued 15 visible exits including the service hallways. Security in 4 corners, wearing tuxedos that were almost good enough to be convincing. A mezzanine level accessible by 2 staircases on opposite ends of the room. And at the far end, near the string quartet, a woman standing alone with a glass of something dark red. She was wearing midnight blue. The dress was silk, he could tell by the way it moved, which was the way water moved in a current, as though gravity was merely a suggestion she was choosing to acknowledge for the time being. Her mask was silver and elaborate, sculpted into the abstract suggestion of a crescent moon, and it covered most of her upper face while leaving her mouth soft, precise, unhurried, fully visible. Her hair was gathered up in a manner that seemed simple and was certainly not. She stood with the particular stillness of someone who was not waiting but watching, and watching so thoroughly that she had made the entire room into her instrument. She was not, Jax noted with professional attention, looking at the art. Everyone else was, even slightly, looking at the art. The Hartwell collection lined the walls, important pieces in gilded frames, the kind of art that demanded acknowledgement. But this woman was looking at the people, and the particular quality of her attention suggested she was doing exactly what he was doing, making a map. He found this interesting. He found it interesting enough to walk toward her, which was not, he told himself, a deviation from the plan. Chapter 2, The First Lie. She felt him before she saw him. Not in any mystical sense. Lyra Ross Martin had long since made her peace with the fact that she did not believe in mystical senses, only in the ways that the body processed information faster than the conscious mind could articulate it. What she felt was the specific shift in the room's social gravity that occurred when someone with genuine confidence moved through a crowd rather than around it. Most people navigated spaces. This one occupied them. She kept her eyes on David Lee, who was currently explaining something to his wife that involved a great deal of hand movement and very little accuracy, and waited. He arrived on her left. "You're reading the room," he said. Not an accusation, not a compliment. An observation, offered without pressure, the way you might hand someone something they'd dropped. "I'm enjoying the music," she said. "The quartet has been playing the same Vivaldi arrangement for 20 minutes. You haven't looked at them once." She turned then, because the alternative was letting him know how much she'd registered about him already, and she had learned years ago that the information you withheld was always more powerful than the information you revealed. He was taller than she'd estimated from across the room. The mask he wore was simple and deliberately so. She noticed that immediately, the way a simplicity so pointed becomes its own kind of statement. His mouth was the feature she landed on and stayed, the specific combination of ease and awareness in it, the sense that it had been trained to say exactly what it meant to say and nothing incidental. She acknowledged privately, going to have to be careful. "I multitask," she said. He smiled, and the smile was the thing she had been bracing for without knowing she was bracing. It was not designed to charm her. It was designed to acknowledge that she had already charmed him and that he considered this information worth sharing. "Jackson Ford," he said, and offered his hand. "Lyra Martin," she said, and gave him hers. The handshake lasted exactly 1 beat longer than protocol required. She registered this. He knew she'd registered it. She knew he knew. This was, she thought, already getting complicated. "Do you collect?" he asked, nodding toward the art on the walls. "I appreciate," she said. "There's a difference. Collectors want to own things. Appreciation doesn't require ownership. That's either very enlightened or very practical. Both, usually." He looked at her for a moment with the kind of attention that lesser men gave to art, the kind that catalogued and assessed, but underneath that was something else, something that was less professional than he probably wanted it to be. She was practiced enough to recognize the difference. "What brings you to the Hartwell Masquerade, MS?" "Martin." She turned back to the room, which gave her the triple advantage of composure, profile, and a reason not to let him watch her choose her words. An old friend thought I'd enjoy the collection. You. Business, he said. Loosely defined. Business at a masquerade ball. Some conversations are easier when no one knows your face. She knew in that precise moment that he was here for the letter. She knew this the way she always knew things, not through dramatic revelation, but through the patient accumulation of small signals that her mind assembled before she consciously directed it to. He had studied the room from the entrance, with a strategist's precision. He was here under a name that was almost certainly his real one, a confidence move, or an oversight, and nothing about him suggested oversight. And the thing he'd said about conversations, it was too specific to be social, and too careful to be accidental. She was also here for the letter. She was also here under her real name. She thought, this is either the worst coincidence of my professional life, or someone has done this deliberately. She thought, smile. She smiled. Another drink, she asked. Chapter 3, Velvet and Wire. The second hour was the most dangerous. Not because anything happened in the second hour, but because Jax found himself operating on 2 tracks simultaneously, which was not unusual for him, but the content of the 2 tracks was. The first track was professional. He had identified the staircase to the 3rd floor, located the east wing through the architectural logic of the house's layout, and established that the security rotation had a 4-minute window between 11 and midnight when the east corridor would be briefly unwatched. The second track was Lyra Martin. They had moved from the edge of the ballroom to a set of French doors that opened onto a side terrace, nominally for air, functionally because the terrace was quieter and slightly removed from the main traffic of the party, and both of them had, in a silent negotiation that neither acknowledged, decided they wanted to continue this particular conversation without witnesses. The night air was cool and carrying the faint sweetness of late-blooming jasmine from the garden below. The city lights burned at the distant edge of the estate's horizon. Lyra stood at the stone balustrade and looked out, and Jax stood beside her close enough that when she tilted her head to listen to something distant, the edge of her silver mask nearly brushed the side of his face. Nearly. He was aware of the nearness with a precision that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with his body's insistence on registering information the brain hadn't requested. The scent of her, something warm and dry, like cedar and skin, underpinned by something floral that she was clearly not trying to advertise, arrived before she moved, and left after. The way she held her wineglass, stem between middle and ring finger, tilted slightly outward, as if she was always in the middle of offering it to someone and had simply not decided who yet. Tell me something true about yourself, she said. Not a command. Not a request, exactly. Something more precise, an opening, left deliberately unguarded, to see what he'd do with it. He considered the question with the weight it deserved. I'm better at leaving than staying, he said. And I've spent a long time telling myself that's the same as being free. She was quiet for a moment. The string quartet's Vivaldi reached them muffled and gentle through the glass. Is it? Less than I'd like. She turned to look at him, and the candlelight from inside caught the silver of her mask and threw a crescent shadow across her cheekbone that made him want to say something he had no right to say to a woman he'd known for 90 minutes. Your turn, he said. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer, and then, I know how to be exactly what any room needs me to be. I've been doing it so long that I sometimes forget which version is the one that exists when no one's watching. And which version is here tonight? Her mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile, but which contained, around its edges, the shape of one. I haven't decided yet. The moment extended itself between them, unhurried, with the particular quality of moments that know they are about to be interrupted. It was interrupted. A server appeared at the terrace door with a silver tray, champagne flutes and a small card, which he offered to Jax with a practiced tilt of his head. Jax took the card. The server departed. He read what was written on it without allowing his expression to change. Stop flirting. The window is in 90 minutes. S. He folded the card twice and slid it into his breast pocket. Duty calls? Lyra asked, and her voice was perfectly pleasant and informed him that she had read the card anyway. He looked at her. She returned his look with the patient composure of someone who had been professionally invisible for a long time and knew exactly how much they were choosing not to be. You have somewhere to be in exactly 90 minutes, she said. Not a question. I'm exactly where I want to be, he said. And where you need to be? The pause between them was the length of an honest thought. The 3rd floor, he said. She looked at him steadily. Then she reached into the small silk evening bag on her wrist and produced a card of her own, not embossed, not formal. A plain cream card with a single line of handwriting. She offered it to him. He took it. Read it. It read, the East Study. The pippin is hinged on the left. The safe requires a 7-digit sequence. I have 4 of the 7 numbers. Echo. He read it twice. Then he looked up at her. Lyra Ross Martin, who had given him her real name and her professional alias in the same evening, held his gaze with the particular stillness of someone who had just done something either very brave or very calculated and was entirely content to let him decide which. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Since you arrived," she said. "You? Since you were reading the room." She smiled, finally and fully, and the full version of it was extraordinary, not the practiced performance he'd been half expecting, but something rarer, the unguarded flash of genuine pleasure at having found something you weren't sure existed. "We have a problem," she said. "Several," he agreed. "Where would you like to start?" Part 2. The Architecture of Deception. Two mirrors facing each other create an infinity. The trick is knowing which reflection is you. Chapter 4. The Weight of a Whisper. They spoke in whispers because the terrace had ears, and they had both survived long enough to know it. Not theatrical whispers, the hushed, dramatic kind that advertise themselves as secrets, but the functional whispers of people who have learned that the most dangerous conversations are the ones that sound like nothing at all. She was standing close enough that he could feel the warmth her body made in the cooler night air, and when she tilted her chin up slightly to put her words directly beside his ear, the silver edge of her mask brushed the line of his jaw. It was the briefest contact. A comma. A breath. He kept his eyes on the garden below them and felt every millimeter of it. "My employer sent me for the same letter your employer sent you for," she said. Her voice at this volume was different, lower, stripped of its social register, carrying the particular texture of something spoken without performance. "Paula Davis Hickory. You'll know the name." He knew the name. Paula Hickory ran the most precise private intelligence operation in the Southeast, catering exclusively to clients whose needs existed in the space between legal and not quite. She was not a criminal in any meaningful sense. She was the person that criminals and city officials and board members called when they needed something resolved discreetly, and she resolved it with the same unhurried confidence with which she apparently did everything else. "She and Williams," Jack said, keeping his own voice low and his face arranged toward the view. "They're competitors for the letter. More than competitors. The letter's contents could be used to destroy the other's client base. Williams' people and Hickory's people are on opposite ends of the same fraud. Whoever gets the letter first controls the narrative. And we both get paid to make sure our respective employer wins. And we've been sent into the same room," she said, "at the same party, on the same night. One of us is supposed to succeed and one of us is supposed to fail. The question is whether that was planned." He thought about this. "If it was planned, one of us is the decoy," he said. "If it was planned, one of us was sent here to be caught." The implication settled between them with the weight of a stone dropped into still water. He became aware, with a precision that he did not enjoy, that his employer, Stephen Williams, had approximately 3,000 more years of experience setting traps than Jack's had of avoiding them. He also became aware that the woman beside him, who had built a career out of surviving exactly this kind of elegant ambush, had made the same calculation about her own employer. "Which one of us is the decoy?" he asked. She turned to look at him, and the angle brought her face within a breath's distance of his. The silk of the evening, the warm amber light spilling through the French doors, the murmur of society doing what society did, all of it became a frame around the small, precise space between their masks. "That," she said, very softly, "is the wrong question. What's the right one? The right question is, what do we do now that we know?" Chapter 5. The Map of Each Other. They found a corner of the library. The Hartwell Library was on the ground floor's east side, accessible from the main hall through a door that was not locked but was heavily curtained, which achieved the same practical effect while maintaining the fiction of accessibility. The room held 12-foot shelves on 3 walls, a pair of leather Chesterfields arranged at angles near the fireplace, and the particular atmosphere of spaces that have been used for serious thought for a long time and have absorbed it. They sat in the Chesterfields facing each other with the low firelight between them, masks still on and unspoken agreement. Without masks, they were only themselves. With masks, they were something more negotiable. "Let's establish what we know," she said. She had produced a small leather notebook from her evening bag and a pen that looked ordinary and was certainly not. She wrote in shorthand that he could not read from his angle, which he respected. "Williams has the letter in a safe behind a Horace Pippin on the 3rd floor east study," he said. "The painting is hinged on the left. You said you have 4 of 7 digits for the combination. I have 4, 6, 9, and 2. I'm missing the 1st, 5th, and 7th positions. And you got those from John Harrison's calendar. He set the combination 3 months ago. I acquired his calendar from the cloud backup of his work device." She said this with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone reporting a grocery list. "The remaining digits are in a second factor code that Harrison keeps on a physical card in his left interior jacket pocket." Jax looked at her. "You need me to lift the card?" "Your hands," she said, without inflection, "are demonstrably better at that than mine." "You've been watching my hands." "I've been watching everything about you, Mr. Ford. It's my job." A pause. The firelight moved. "Some of it is my job." He let that sit for a moment, because it deserved to sit, and because his professional discipline required him to put it somewhere it would not interfere with the work, and his personal discipline required him to note that it was, in fact, interfering with the work regardless. The window, he said. 40 minutes now. Harrison does his security walkthrough at 11:15. The east corridor is clear between 11 and 11:10. If we're going in, we go in the next. 38 minutes. 38 minutes. She looked at him with a consideration that felt like being taken apart and reassembled, carefully and without damage, by someone who actually cared whether the pieces went back correctly. If we do this together, she said, we get the letter. One physical letter. That cannot be split. Then whoever holds it has the leverage. Unless we make it worthless to both sides, she said. He went very still. This was not the stillness of surprise. Jax did not surprise easily. It was the stillness of someone who has encountered an idea large enough to require a moment of genuine consideration. You want to use it against both of them, he said. I want to ensure that Williams and Hickory both know we have it and both know we can distribute it. Which means neither of them can use us, pursue us, or benefit from the game they've been playing with two pieces they thought were theirs to move. She closed her notebook. I want out of this world, Mr. Ford. I have wanted out for 3 years. I believe you want the same thing. You believe. I read people. You read me. You read me first, she said, and there was something in it that was almost gentle. Almost. The fire shifted. Somewhere in the ballroom, the quartet had moved from Vivaldi to something else, slower, lower, meant for bodies in motion close together. If this doesn't work, he said, it will work. If it doesn't, then we're both caught, both without payment, and both looking for the next exit. Which is a situation I believe we are individually practiced at and could manage together somewhat more efficiently. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, tell me the rest of your plan. And she did. Chapter 6. What the Masks Allow. It was the closeness that did it. Not a dramatic closeness, not the kind you could point to afterward and say, there, that was the moment. It was the accumulated closeness of a plan laid out in whispers, of two people leaning across the small gap between Chesterfields to consult the same handwritten page, of her finger moving along a rough map she'd drawn of the 3rd floor and his arriving beside it to indicate a detail she'd missed, and the two fingers resting there on the paper, not touching, but occupying the same inch of space. The fire was lower. The noise of the party had become a background thing, something that existed in a different layer of the evening entirely. The service corridor, he said quietly, runs parallel to the east wing. There's access through the kitchen. Harrison won't have coverage there because he doesn't see the kitchen staff as a variable. He doesn't see service people as variables, she corrected, and her voice had an edge on it that was not anger, but something adjacent, a specific and personal knowingness. That's a common mistake. One that works in our favor. Most of the time. She looked up from the map, and the angle brought her face close to his. The silver of her mask caught the last of the firelight. Her eyes, visible above it, dark and steady, and watching him with an attention that was entirely present in a way he had not been watched in a very long time, did not look away. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more. She paused in a way that suggested the pause was honest rather than tactical. Singular. You have a reputation for working alone. For not, another pause. For not needing anyone. I don't need anyone, he said. His voice was even. That's different from not wanting. The sentence arrived and stayed. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been handed something they were not expecting and are deciding whether they can afford to keep it. We should go, she said softly. We should, he agreed, and neither of them moved. It was a moment held too long. A breath extended past its natural end. The kind of stillness that means something is being decided below the level of words, not the plan, not the letter, not the exits. Something smaller and therefore larger. His hand, which had been resting on the arm of the Chesterfield, moved. Not toward her, nothing so direct. It moved to the edge of her notebook, which was on the cushion between them, and his fingers rested there against the leather cover. She looked down at his hand and then back at his face. She reached over and covered his hand with hers. Just that. Just the warmth of her palm against the back of his hand, the slight pressure of it, the simple and irreversible fact of it. No calculation, he thought, or if it was calculated, she was so far beyond him in that art that the distinction ceased to matter. We're going to get caught, he said, very quietly, if we stay in here. No, she said, equally quiet, and she did not move her hand. 1 moment. 2. The fire gave a last shift of light. Then she stood, and the hand was gone, and she was smoothing the silk of her dress and tucking the notebook back into her evening bag with the crisp efficiency of someone resuming a previous self. 30 minutes, she said. 30 minutes, he said, and rose to follow her into the bright noise of everything they were about to do. Part 3. The 3rd floor. There is a version of courage that no one names, the willingness to trust someone you have no reason to trust. Chapter 7. The Lift. John Harrison was easy to like, and that made him dangerous. Most security professionals projected a deliberate blankness, trained neutrality, professional distance. Harrison wore his competence differently. He was warm, attentive, the kind of man who remembered names and wine preferences and asked genuine follow-up questions about things you'd mentioned in passing. This was, Jax understood, a strategy more sophisticated than blankness. People were less guarded around warmth. They leaned in. They disclosed. Which was, of course, precisely what Jax intended to make Harrison do. He found the man near the bar, engaged in conversation with David Lee about a piece in the East Gallery. Lee was holding forth with the particular enthusiasm of someone who has confused fluency with authority, and Harrison was listening with genuine patience that probably cost him something. Jax arrived with 2 fresh glasses of champagne, offered one to Harrison with the easy confidence of a man who belongs everywhere. "Jackson Ford," he said. "I've been meaning to find you all evening. Steven mentioned you'd be here. The security setup tonight is remarkable. You can barely feel it, which is exactly right." Harrison accepted the champagne and angled toward him with the unconscious realignment of someone pleased to have their expertise acknowledged. "Appreciate that. We try to keep things elegant. The coverage on the mezzanine," Jax said, nodding upward, "is particularly well conceived. The angles. You'd need a specific blind spot to get through it." Harrison smiled with the pride of craft. "Not easily. South staircase. Covered. Service corridor?" A fractional pause, not suspicion, just the professional instinct to track what he was sharing. "That's more restricted access." Of course. Jax kept Harrison talking for 4 minutes. He talked about the art, the family history, the logistics of running security for an event of the scale, and at the 90-second mark of the conversation, while reaching out to gesture at something across the room with the hand that wasn't holding his glass, he slid 2 fingers into Harrison's left interior jacket pocket, extracted the small laminated card inside, and transferred it to his own pocket in a motion that lasted less time than a blink. By the time Harrison finished his sentence, the card was gone. Jax excused himself with warmth and a handshake at the 4-minute mark. Crossed the ballroom. Slipped through the curtained door at the base of the east staircase. Found Lyra already there, waiting in the shadows at the top of the first landing. He held up the card between 2 fingers. She looked at it and then at him, and the expression on the portion of her face he could read was something that he decided to call impressed, because it was closer to the truth than the alternatives. "I said your hands were better," she murmured. "You were right," he said. "Let's go." Chapter 8. The Horace Pippin. The east study was exactly where the architecture told him it would be. 3rd floor, 4th door on the right from the top of the staircase, a room that existed in the part of the house where the formal presentation of the lower floors gave way to something more private and more honest. The hallway here was narrower, the ceiling lower, the lighting from wall sconces that cast a warmth more intimate than the chandeliers below. Lyra tried the handle. Locked. She produced a slim leather case from her evening bag, selected a pick with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times, and had the lock resolved in 40 seconds. 40 seconds was, Jax thought, not bad. The study was a working room, not a display room. A large partner's desk dominated the center, its surface covered in the organized disorder of ongoing business. Bookshelves held legal texts and financial documents alongside the kind of art books that implied taste while requiring very little of it. The room smelled of old paper and the particular leather of a chair that had held the same body for many years. And there, on the wall behind and to the left of the desk, the Pippin. Horace Pippin's work had always moved Jax in a way that other art did not. He didn't know the technical language for why. He only knew that Pippin's paintings held a specific quality of earned witness, the sense that the images had been made by someone who had seen things and survived them and returned to make something beautiful out of the surviving. This one was a domestic scene, a woman in a red dress at a table near a window, the light coming through in a way that was both ordinary and sacred. He looked at it for 2 seconds longer than was strictly necessary. Lyra put her hand on the left edge of the frame. The painting swung outward on a smooth, counterweight hinge, revealing the face of a small wall safe behind it. "Card," she said. He handed her the laminated card. She tilted it toward the slant of light from the window, exterior light, the city below the estate still vivid at this hour, and read off 3 numbers. She studied the card and her own notebook, cross-referencing positions, then began to key the sequence into the electronic pad on the safe. 1. Pause. 4. 6. 2. Pause. 9. 3. 2. The safe made a sound like a small, civil argument resolving itself and opened. Inside, a thumb drive, a silver ring, several thousand in cash, a passport, and beneath all of it, in an unsealed envelope, a letter. She took the letter. Handed him the thumb drive. He looked at her. "The thumb drive contains the encryption key," she said. "I didn't tell you earlier because I wasn't sure yet." "Wasn't sure of what?" She looked at him directly, and in the dark of the study with only The city light behind her, the silver of her mask had become something less ornamental and more essential, the face that allowed the face to be honest. You, she said. He understood. And now? And now I'm sure. Chapter 9. The Double Cross. They had 22 minutes before Harrison's walkthrough. They used 11 of them to compose the message. Lyra sat at the partner's desk in the half-dark. She'd found the study's desk lamp and angled it low, facing the wall, enough light to work by, not enough to show under the door, and drafted 2 versions of the same message on 2 cards from the stationery in the desk drawer. Jack stood at the window and kept watch on the garden below, where the party's guests occasionally appeared for air and conversation. Williams first, she said. Stephen Branch Williams, he said, and the formality of the full name, in this context, felt like the closing of a door. He'll expect the letter. He'll get the first message and assume it's a negotiating position. Which it is. The message tells him we have the letter and the key, that we are willing to deliver it to neither party, and that if he pursues either of us, what we have becomes public and every name in it is exposed. She wrote as she spoke, the shorthand flowing quickly and then translating itself into plain language. Hickory gets the same message. And both of them sit with the knowledge that the other has received it. Which means neither can move without the other knowing, and neither can move without us being willing to release what we have, and we become a mutually assured problem that neither of them wants to trigger. We become ours own quiet deadlock. He turned from the window to look at her. She was writing with her left hand, the pen moving across the card with the authority of someone whose mind had already moved 3 steps past the moment. And the desk lamp threw a warm arc of light across her face and the silver of her mask and the dark blue of her dress, and Jax Ford, who was good at many things and generally terrible at honesty about what he wanted, stood there in the borrowed dark of someone else's study and felt something adjust in him that had been misaligned for a long time. He didn't name it. He filed it. The delivery, he said. Juan Hicks. He'll get both messages to the right places before the party ends. She looked up. You know him? He charged me $3,000 to courier a flash drive to Charlotte last year. He charged me $4,000 to courier 2 envelopes to Miami. He is going to love this job. He is going to charge us a combined $15,000 for this job. We'll have enough. She finished the second card, sealed both envelopes, wrote the delivery addresses from memory. Then she sat back and looked at the 2 envelopes on the desk and then at him. And after, she said. Not a question, exactly. Not a statement. The space at the end of a conversation where the important part was being held back to see if the other person would reach for it. After, he said carefully, we leave. Tonight. Together or separately, but we leave. Together is safer. Together is. He stopped. Together is what? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, something I'd like to try if you're willing. The silence that followed was the length of a decision. Close the safe, she said. He did. Rehang the painting. He did. We have 11 minutes before we need to be back downstairs, visible and entirely above suspicion. 10, he corrected. 10. She stood from the desk, and the dress moved around her the way it had moved all evening, that particular silk and gravity conversation, and she crossed the distance between them, not quickly, not slowly. At the pace of someone who has decided something and is simply completing the motion the decision already made. She stopped in front of him. 6 inches. The warmth of the room they'd made between them in the last 2 hours, the specific warmth of proximity and understanding, and the particular chemistry of being exactly matched in the one area that mattered most to both of them. Intelligence brought to bear on things worth caring about. She reached up and adjusted the angle of his mask with one fingertip, the barest touch, completely unnecessary and entirely intentional. 10 minutes, she said, very quietly. 10 minutes, he confirmed, and his voice had gone somewhere lower and more honest than his usual register. Her hand rested lightly at the lapel of his jacket. His hand found the curve of her waist, the silk warm beneath his palm, the shape of her certain and present and real in a way that the last several hours had increasingly made him want with a specificity that alarmed him. She leaned up. He leaned in. The masks, by design, left their mouths free. The kiss was not tentative. It was not exploratory. It had the quality of confirmation, the particular register of something that both parties had been calculating the probability of and had arrived at simultaneously. Her fingers curled into his lapel. His hand spread against her back, drawing her a breath closer, and she came willingly, and the small sound she made against his mouth was the only thing in the room that was not careful and controlled and deliberate. It was exactly one sound, and it was enough. They pulled back at the same moment, professional discipline returning in the same breath. Her eyes, dark and luminous above the silver mask, found his. 9 minutes, she said, slightly breathless in a way she didn't appear to be trying to conceal. 8, he said. And I'm not apologizing. I wasn't going to ask you to. Part 4. The unmasking. The most truthful thing you can do is show someone the face beneath the face and stay in the room while they look. Chapter 10. The Last Dance. They returned to the ballroom at 10:57, from separate entrances, 11 seconds apart. Jax entered from the main hall, champagne in hand, moving through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who had been at a party all evening and had not, in that time, committed a single act of elegant theft. He found a position near the dance floor and maintained it with the disciplined casualness that was the hardest thing to teach and the most valuable thing to have. Lyra entered from the terrace, having used the 4 minutes of her separate return to deliver both sealed envelopes to Juan Hicks, who had been smoking in the kitchen courtyard with the patient composure of a man who expected to be found exactly now, and who accepted the envelopes and the description of the delivery addresses and the number Jax had texted to Lyra's phone with the serene professionalism of someone for whom this was simply Tuesday. He had said only, price. She had said, whatever it costs. He had said, 22,000. She had said, done. He had gone back inside. She had gone back to the party. The ballroom was at its late evening peak now, the particular hour when the champagne had done its work and the music had shifted to something with a genuine pulse beneath it. And the formal arrangements of earlier in the evening had loosened into something more like actual desire. Couples had organized themselves on the dance floor. The chandeliers had dimmed imperceptibly. She found him near the floor because she'd known she would. He turned when she was still several feet away, not dramatic, not performed, simply the specific awareness of someone whose attention had recalibrated toward her. He held out his hand. She took it. The dance floor received them without ceremony. The music was slow and the crowd close enough that the space between any two bodies was already intimate by the fact of proximity, which made the intimacy between them, the particular, earned, specific kind, something that only they could read. He danced with the composed competence of someone who had learned not because he loved dancing, but because it was useful, and had since found, to his own mild surprise, that it was also something else. She danced the way she did everything, with precision that appeared effortless, with awareness that made it feel like collaboration. They moved. Done, he murmured. Done, she confirmed, near his ear, her chin briefly on his shoulder as they turned. We'll have them both delivered before midnight. Harrison's card? Back in his pocket during the handshake you did at the bar. He doesn't know it was gone. He pulled back just enough to look at her. She returned the look. When did you put it back, he asked. When you shook his hand at the end. I was 2 feet behind you. I didn't see you. I know. He looked at her. She looked at him. I'm going to need to pay significantly more attention to what you're doing, he said, and meant it in more ways than he let himself catalog at this particular moment. Or less, she said. Depending on what you're trying to accomplish. The music held them. The room turned slowly around the fixed point of the dance floor. Through the high windows, the city burned its quiet, ongoing fire. After tonight, he said. After tonight, she agreed. You said you've wanted out for 3 years. 3 years, 4 months, and some change. What was the something change? She was quiet for one turn of the floor. A job in New Orleans. A man I thought I trusted. A lesson that was expensive enough that I stopped counting the days after it. He understood the shape of this without requiring the details. Where do you want to go? She lifted her head from his shoulder and looked at him directly, and in the shifting light her silver mask had become something he associated with her rather than something that obscured her, the same way, he thought, that you stopped noticing a person's particular voice and started just hearing what they said. Somewhere with a coast, she said. And decent coffee. And enough quiet that I can hear myself think. A pause. You. Same, he said. Same and then some. Then some. I'd like to stay somewhere long enough to know what the neighborhood sounds like in the morning. Something moved through her expression, not quite a smile, but what a smile was. Made from. That's the most specific thing you've told me about yourself all evening, she said. I'm working on specificity, he said. Bear with me. Chapter 11. The Hour of Unmasking. At midnight, Stephen Williams called for the unmasking. It was tradition, the midnight reveal, the formal moment when the masquerade released its hold and the evening became something more conventionally social. A champagne toast, a count, the lifting of masks, the chorus of half-surprised recognition and delighted laughter that always accompanied the reveal of the known from behind the unknown. Jax reached up. Lyra reached up. They removed their masks at the same moment and looked at each other. There was a particular quality to this moment that neither of them had planned for. They had seen each other's mouths all evening, had spoken, whispered, and kissed across the architecture of those masks, but the upper face, released now into the candlelight, added something new. His eyes, which she had registered peripherally in the dark of the study, were dark and direct and intelligent in the specific way of people who have trained themselves not to reveal what they see, and this very discipline made it more visible rather than less. His face at full showed the kind of beauty that comes with time and pressure, planes and hollows, and a particular quality of character in the set of his jaw. He looked at her. Her face, unmasked, he didn't have a single word for it. She was not beautiful in the ways that were easy to process, the arranged and symmetrical ways. She was beautiful in the way that certain truths were beautiful, because she was completely and specifically herself, because there was no version of her face that was designed for external consumption. And the lack of design was the thing that made it extraordinary. Well, she said. Well, he agreed. Around them, the room was celebrating its own revelations, Stephen Williams moving through his guests with the expansive warmth of a host who doesn't yet know his safe has been visited. John Harrison accepting champagne with the untroubled ease of a security professional who doesn't know his card was briefly borrowed, David Lee explaining something to a new audience. In this room of reveals, the two of them stood with their masks in their hands and their faces in the open air, and something that was not yet a name between them. I don't know your middle name, he said. Ross, she said. My mother's name. My middle name is Dean. After my grandfather. He was a gambler. Of course he was. He was also honest about it, which he said was the only form of honor available to someone in his line of work. She considered this. I think I would have liked him. He would have loved you, Jack said. He had a very specific weakness for women who could read a room. Stephen Williams materialized at Jax's elbow at that moment, resplendent and unsuspecting, champagne glass raised. Jackson. So pleased you made it. And who is your lovely companion? Jax looked at Lyra. Lyra looked at Jax. A communication in the length of a breath. An old friend, Jack said. You know how it is. Every masquerade, someone turns up who changes the whole evening. Williams smiled the smile of a man who was about to have a very different kind of evening than he knew and raised his glass. To echoes, he said. To echoes, they replied and drank. Chapter 12, The Exit. They left at 12:40. Not together, separately, through different exits, converging 3 blocks away at a side street where Lyra's car was parked in a spot she'd selected 3 days prior for its angle to the road and its distance from cameras. Jax arrived first. She arrived 45 seconds later. She got in the driver's seat. He got in the passenger seat. The door closed and the city was briefly loud and then muffled. She started the car. One confirmed delivery, she said. 11:47. Both? Both. He let out a breath that he'd been holding, he realized, since approximately 10:15. She pulled away from the curb and into the street with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had driven out of difficult situations in many different cities, and who had learned that the most important thing about an exit was not its speed, but its quality. The difference between running and simply going. They didn't speak for several minutes. The city moved past the windows, amber and alive. Then she said, I know a place in Savannah. He turned to look at her profile in the passing light. Coastal? 15 minutes from the water. Small house. The landlord doesn't ask questions, she glanced sideways. Yes, I have one of those too. Of course you do. There's a coffee shop 2 streets over that opens at 5:30 and makes a cup of coffee that borders on the kind of thing people write letters about. And the mornings? A pause. The briefest pause, the kind where the thing being decided is whether to let yourself want what you want out loud. The mornings are quiet, she said. You can hear the marsh. And the birds. You've stayed there before. Once. When I was trying to decide something. What did you decide? She was quiet for a moment. The road opened ahead of them, long and clear. To wait, she said. I decided to wait until I found something worth deciding toward. The car moved through the night. After a long moment, he said, How far is Savannah? She looked at him, and the look was the thing, the full, unmasked, unperformed version of her face in the dashboard light, the specific expression of a woman who has been careful for a very long time and is considering what it might feel like to be something else. For hours, she said. If we leave now. He reached across and turned up the heat against the November night. Then drive, he said. She drove. Part 5. What the dark holds. Everything negotiated in the daylight is renegotiated in the dark. This is not failure. This is how the real terms get made. Chapter 13. For hours. The drive to Savannah was 4 hours of the most honest conversation Jax had had in a decade. Which meant it was also, in places, the most difficult. They had both built lives around the management of disclosure, around the fine art of giving people enough to satisfy without giving them enough to use. This was not deception in its malignant form, it was the practiced survival mechanism of people who had learned early that information was leverage and that giving it away was the same as making yourself available to be leveraged. But Savannah was ahead of them, for hours of highway and the dark stretching between here and the rest of their lives, and both of them had arrived at the same moment of life. The particular moment that comes when you have been careful for so long that the carefulness itself has begun to cost you something you can't afford to keep paying. So they talked. She told him about New Orleans. Not the whole of it was still in the category of things that required more time and more trust than even this evening had built, but the shape of it, the relevant shape. A man who had hired her as an informant and then sold the information she gave him, which had almost killed 2 people and had definitely ended her ability to trust her own assessment of character. How she'd spent the subsequent 3 years rebuilding that assessment tool from the ground up, more cautiously, with more checkpoints, less of what she'd once called intuition and more of what she now understood was intuition clarified by method. "You trust your read on me," he said. It was not a question. "I trust my read on you," she confirmed. "Why?" She considered. "Because you didn't have to tell me about the third floor when you did. You could have kept it operational. You told me because you'd decided something, and the decision was visible in the way you said it. People who are lying to you rarely make that kind of tell, the intentional disclosure that costs them something. They hoard. You were willing to spend." He thought about this. "What did I spend?" "The advantage." He nodded slowly. The highway was long and the night was clear and the stars, this far from the city, were making a genuine effort. He told her about Atlanta. The East Side and the years of it, the specific education of growing up in the shadow economy of a city that had one face for the cameras and another for everyone else. The grandfather who'd gambled with integrity, by which he meant the man had always known the game was rigged and had played anyway with full information, and had taught Jax that the worst position you could occupy was the one where you'd been fooled into thinking the game was fair. "He sounds like someone who figured out the rules and decided to write his own," Lyra said. "That's exactly what he did." He said, "The rules are for people who made them. The rest of us get to decide whether to follow rules that weren't written with us in mind." "And you decided?" "I decided to follow my own." "Which are?" He was quiet for a moment. "Don't hurt people who haven't earned it. Don't make a promise you're not going to keep. Don't stay anywhere you can't leave." He paused. "That last one I'm reconsidering." She glanced at him. The highway moved under them. "Reconsidering as of when?" "As of approximately 9:15 this evening," he said, "when I walked into a masquerade and a woman in midnight blue was reading the room." The silence that followed was the warmth of the sentence still in the air between them. She kept her eyes on the road. "For what it's worth," she said, very carefully, "I had the same thought." Around 9:30. "What thought?" "That I was going to have to reconsider a rule I'd been keeping." "Which one?" "The one about not staying." A long, clean stretch of highway. "Which one of your rules," he asked, "required you not to stay?" "The one that says wanting something you can't control is the fastest way to lose it." "And am I something you can't control?" Her mouth curved. "Completely," she said. "Which is the problem and possibly also the point." Chapter 14. The House by the Marsh. The house was exactly as she'd described and something she hadn't, a small craftsman bungalow on a narrow street that dead-ended at the edge of a tidal marsh. The kind of street that smelled of salt and old wood and the particular living quietness of water that moved with the moon. She had a key. Of course she had a key. She had said she'd stayed here before, had said the landlord didn't ask questions, and when he thought about it later he understood that what she'd built here was not just a place to stay but a place to return to. A fixed point. The kind that people who are always moving construct in secret, the way birds build certain nests, hidden, specific, and entirely serious. It was 3 a.m. when they arrived. The house had the settled quiet of a space that had been empty for some time but not neglected. She had clearly maintained it, or had someone maintain it, with the quiet efficiency that characterized everything she did. The living room held a worn sofa the color of old moss and a bookshelf of paperbacks in several languages, and a standing lamp that gave the room an amber warmth when she turned it on. The kitchen was small and functional. There was a back porch that overlooked the marsh, the water visible as a dark movement between the grasses in the pre-dawn dark. She went to the back porch immediately, and he followed because the logic of the evening suggested following her was generally the correct choice. The marsh at 3 a.m. was a particular kind of alive. The air was cold and full of the low, mineral scent of tidal water and the distant sound of things moving through the grasses, birds, small creatures, the secret population of the in-between places. The lights of the city were entirely absent here. The sky held its stars without competition. She stood at the porch railing in her silk dress with her silver mask in her hands and looked out at the water, and he stood beside her, and the distance between their shoulders was the width of a decision. "I bought this place," she said. He waited. "I've been telling myself I rented it. Paying the landlord who doesn't ask questions, maintaining the fiction of impermanence. But I bought it 2 years ago. Under a name that leads nowhere and a corporate structure that will take a very determined person a very long time to untangle." She turned the mask over in her hands. "I bought it because I needed to know there was somewhere to be when I was done." "And are you?" "Done." "Done." She considered the marsh. "Yes," she said. "After tonight, yes. Williams and Hickory are both compromised. They won't come for us, they have too much to lose and no reliable way to find us that doesn't cost them more than they gain. We're free." "Then what?" She turned to look at him. The marsh dark and the pre-dawn sky behind her. Her face, still fully unmasked now for hours, had become the face he was learning, its specific syntax, the particular vocabulary of its expressions, the things it showed and the things it kept. "Then this," she said. "If you want it. The house. The house. The marsh. The coffee shop that opens at 5:30. A pause. Me. The word arrived and stayed. He looked at her. He had the specific quality of stillness that she had come to understand, in the hours of this evening, meant he was thinking something he intended to mean. I want it, he said, and his voice was at its most honest register, low and direct, and carrying the specific weight of something that had not been said lightly. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she set the silver mask on the railing. He set his beside it. There was a particular ceremony to this that neither of them named. The masks set side by side on a porch railing above a Georgia marsh in the 3 o'clock dark, silver and onyx, crescent and shadow, were not discarded exactly. They were placed. Deliberately. The way you placed something you intended to keep and were also done hiding behind. He moved first, or she did. The precise sequence was unclear and would remain so, because it was the kind of movement that had no initiator, only participants. He closed the space between them with the particular certainty of someone who has stopped negotiating with himself, and she met him there with equal certainty. And when they came together, it was without the careful architecture of the study 10 minutes into an operation, without the discipline of proximity managed at professional distance. This was the unmanaged version. His hands found her face, tilting it, and hers found the fabric of his jacket and held, and the kiss they made together there on the porch above the marsh was long and quiet and deeply serious, the kind that establishes something rather than suggests it. That does not invite questions because it has already answered the relevant ones. When they broke, her forehead came to rest against his, and they stood there in the breathing dark, the marsh moving below, the stars completing their arc. Jax, she said. Lyra, he said. Just the names, exchanged in the quiet, as if formally introducing themselves to the version of the evening that came after the masks. Chapter 15. The Long Currency of Trust. The bedroom was at the back of the house, its window above the marsh. And she had put linen on the bed with the quiet domesticity of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by her own careful preparation for things she'd told herself were theoretical. The lamp on the bedside table was on low. They stood in the room with the specific awareness of people who have been moving towards something for hours and have now arrived at it and are taking a moment to actually be where they are. This was not hesitation. It was presence, the quality of it, the deliberateness of choosing to inhabit a moment rather than move through it. He reached up and undid his tie with the same hands she'd watched all evening, quick and sure, and capable of things they hadn't yet been asked to do. Tell me what you like, he said. His voice was low and direct. Not a performance. Not a line. The genuine inquiry of someone who had decided that specificity mattered. She looked at him. Most men don't ask, she said. I'm not most men. I'm also not in a hurry. She considered him. Slowness, she said. I like slowness. I spend most of my life moving fast. I know. And I like knowing that someone is paying attention. Real attention. The kind that notices. I've been paying attention since the moment I walked in. I know that too, she said, and her voice had shifted into something that was no longer professional, no longer strategic, just hers, in its unedited form, and it was lower and warmer than either voice she'd used all evening. He took a step toward her. She didn't step back. What else? He asked. She held his gaze while she answered him, and the specificity of her answer, the particular, deliberate vocabulary of it, the knowledge of herself contained in it, was its own kind of intimacy, the kind that precedes and informs everything else. I like being taken seriously, she said. And I like the moment when someone stops taking me seriously in a specific, chosen way. He held her gaze. Tell me when that is, he said. I will, she said. He moved to her with the same quality he brought to everything, thorough, purposeful, fully present. His hands at her waist first, the silk warm and alive beneath his palms, then tracing the line of her back with a deliberateness that honored what she'd asked for. Slow. Attending. She let her hands work at his jacket, and he assisted without impatience, shrugging out of it, setting it aside with the neatness of someone who didn't have much use for theater. What he was making room for wasn't performance. It was the real thing, which required different conditions. The zipper at her back was a single long line, and he moved it down with a patience that was its own statement, not hesitation but intention, the choice to make every step mean something. The silk gave, and his hands followed the fabric's departure with a warmth that made her breath change. She had said slow. He had said he wasn't in a hurry. Both of these things remained true for a long and specific time. What they built between them had the quality of their conversation, two people of equal intelligence and equal need operating without a script, without predetermined roles, without the performance that both of them had spent careers maintaining. In this room, above this marsh, in the pre-dawn of a day that would mark the beginning of something rather than the continuation of something, they were simply themselves. And themselves together were, this was the fact that surprised him most, enormously good. Not just physically, though physically they had arrived at a fluency that felt, against all probability, like something practiced rather than discovered. but in the way of attention and response and the ongoing conversation of two bodies communicating at a register below language. She pulled him down to her with the specific grip of a woman who has taken what she wanted and found it meets the occasion, and the sound she made was the same sound she'd made in the study, unguarded, unperformed, and entirely hers. He answered it with the low, honest register of his voice saying her name, and she said his, and they were not hiding anything. This was the thing neither of them had adequately prepared for, not the danger or the plan or the double cross or even the attraction, but this specific quality of being entirely seen. For two people who had spent careers being precisely the things that other people needed them to be, the relief of it was enormous. The marsh moved outside the window. The stars completed themselves. Afterward, she lay against him in the low light of the bedside lamp, and his hand moved slowly through her hair with the unhurried quality of someone with nowhere to be for the first time in a long time. She traced the line of his forearm with one finger, following the geography of it. "You're staying," she said. Not a question. An observation. "I'm staying," he confirmed. "For how long?" He was quiet for a moment. "Let's start with long enough to know what the morning sounds like," he said. She settled more fully against him. "It sounds like marsh birds and the coffee shop 2 streets over and someone's wind chimes when the tide turns." "That," he said, "sounds exactly right." Epilogue. The morning after the masquerade. The Gemini does not choose between two truths. The Gemini is the bridge. The coffee shop opened at 5:30. He went, and she told him what to order, and he came back at 20 to 6 with 2 cups and the information that the person behind the counter was named Jackie Lee Brown, and she had asked him 3 questions before she'd made the coffee, which suggested she was either curious by nature or very particular about who she caffeinated. Both, Lyra said, sitting on the back porch in the early morning with her legs folded under her and her hair undone, and the marsh catching the first pale suggestion of sunrise. "She's been here since I first came. She's protective of the neighborhood. She said to tell you she'd seen the car and to come by properly. She means together. She's very specific about the word properly." He handed her the coffee and settled beside her, and they sat with the marsh in front of them and the first birds beginning and the light making its slow, irreversible argument for morning. His phone vibrated. He looked at it, a message from an unknown number that resolved, when decoded with the key he'd been given months ago, into the name Stephen Branch Williams, followed by the single word, understood. Her phone vibrated. She looked at it and showed him without comment, Paula Davis Hickory, followed by, "We're done. Don't surface." He pocketed his phone. She pocketed hers. "It worked," she said. "It worked," he agreed. The sun arrived over the marsh in the particular way of Georgia mornings in late autumn, not dramatically but certainly. The light spreading itself across the water and the grass with the patience of something that has been doing this for a very long time and has no doubt about its eventual arrival. "I'm going to need a different name," he said. "I have several available. I'll send you a list." "Of course you will. You'll want something southern. For the accent." "I don't have an accent." "You have an Atlanta accent. It's subtle, but it's there." Something like, she considered him, tilting her head with the particular focus he'd come to understand meant she was processing, Thomas. David Thomas. Something with weight to it. David Thomas. Or Dean. You could keep Dean. Dean what? Dean Ford is too close. Dean Branch. She looked at him. "Are you taking the name of the man who just tried to have us betray each other?" "I'm repurposing it." The marsh birds rose, a small dark wheeling flock, and settled again somewhere out of sight. "Dean Branch," she said, testing it. "That actually works." "I know," he said. "You're not the only one who reads things accurately." She smiled, and the full version of it was extraordinary in the morning light, the same smile from the study, the same unguarded flash, but fuller now, less surprised by itself. "You know," she said, "the Gemini's whole thing is the twin. The dual nature. The 2 faces. I've been told. But the part no one talks about is what happens when the twin finds another twin. When you find someone who matches your duality." She held her coffee in both hands and looked at the marsh. "There's a theory that Geminis don't need to reconcile their 2 sides. They need to find someone who can hold both. Is that what you are?" She looked at him sideways with the expression of a woman who has decided something and is choosing her exact words for the announcement of it. "I'm Echo," she said. "I held your frequency and gave it back." He looked at her. "And Jax?" "Jax is the frequency," she said. Persistent. Specific. Looking for something to echo off. The sun was fully up now, the marsh gold and alive, the tide turning its slow turn. "I found one," he said. "You found one," she agreed. They drank their coffee. The morning sounded exactly like she'd said it would. A note for the series. Don't forget to like and subscribe. What comes next? The Zodiac Alchemy series continues with 12 complete explorations of love in all its cosmic configurations. Each sign is a story. Each story is a world. Aries, the burning bridge for those who love with a fire that never blinks. Taurus, the ground beneath your name, a tribute to the beauty of being truly grounded. Gemini, the masquerade of echoes, where wit meets worth in a dance of duality. You are here. Cancer, the sanctuary within, a heart that leads becomes a home. Leo, the lion's keep for the radiant souls who protect what they love. Virgo, the perfect detail, finding the divine in the smallest things. Libra, the weight of beautiful things, balance, strategy, and the art of true harmony. Scorpio, what truth transforms for the intense souls who emerge through fire. Sagittarius, the wild at heart, a love letter to seekers who never stop moving. Capricorn, the long foundation, building a legacy on the bedrock of what lasts. Aquarius, the new frequency for the rebels who remake the rules of connection. Pisces, the dreamers deep into the transcendent power of the dreaming heart. Hood Eloquence,